September 1944. The people of London, survivors of the Blitz, believed the worst was over. The skies, scarred by years of war, had fallen silent. But this new, heavy silence was not peace. It was the terrifying prelude to an unseen enemy. Suddenly, oblivion struck from nowhere. There was no familiar scream of a dive bomber, no droning engine of a buzz bomb. Just a catastrophic, deafening blast that ripped through the city, a destructive force that arrived faster than the very sound it made. In the chaos that followed, survivors were baffled. There was no warning, no plane, no siren. Just a blinding flash followed by total destruction. This was the dawn of a new warfare. This was Hitler's vengeance weapon, the V2 rocket, but this weapon was not born overnight. As the Third Reich began to crumble on all fronts, a desperate Hitler demanded a new tool of vengeance. He poured immense resources into a secret project, far from the battlefields. This was Peenemünde, a remote windswept island on the Baltic coast. Hidden from Allied spies, this vast, secretive complex was the cradle of rocket science, a place where futuristic dreams were being forged into instruments of terror. At the heart of this project was a team of brilliant engineers, driven by ambition. Their calculations, designs, and relentless testing were pushing the boundaries of known technology, all focused on one goal: reaching space to conquer the Earth. The brain behind the V2 was Werner von Braun, a visionary. Yes, but also a man whose genius was tragically entangled with the darkest regime in history, blurring the lines between scientific ambition and mass destruction. Their initial prototypes were crude, often failing spectacularly on launch. Each catastrophic mishap, however, was a fiery lesson, relentlessly pushing the engineers closer to their ultimate destructive goal, fueled by an obsessive drive. But the manufacturing demands were immense. The V2 was a behemoth, requiring vast quantities of materials and an unprecedented workforce. Traditional factories simply could not produce them fast enough. The solution was as brutal as it was ingenious. Deep within the Harz Mountains, a network of forgotten tunnels would be transformed into an impenetrable underground factory, a fortress of fear.
Don't miss our incredible war stories. Subscribe for more. And for the full mission, watch the full video on our channel, link in the description.
This was Mittelwerk, a name that would become synonymous with suffering. Inside the mountain, a colossal network of tunnels was carved out, not by machines, but by the hands of those the Reich had deemed subhuman. Thousands of concentration camp prisoners were forced into this subterranean hell. They were given only the most primitive tools to dig and build, working in choking dust and perpetual twilight, driven beyond all human endurance. Overseeing this brutal labor were the SS guards. Their presence was a constant, shadowy menace, ensuring that the work never stopped, day or night. Fear was the fuel that built this factory. While the prisoners toiled, massive pieces of sophisticated machinery began to arrive. Giant lathes, presses, and assembly jigs were dragged into the depths, turning this damp cave into a nightmarish, futuristic production line. Day and night, trains rumbled through the mountain. They brought in raw steel, advanced components, and more slave laborers. And they hauled out the finished instruments of death, hidden from the Allied bombers flying far above. Inside the cavernous tunnels, a terrifyingly efficient assembly line took shape. Here, the giant, hollow shells of the V2 rockets were welded and riveted together, moving slowly but relentlessly toward their deadly purpose. This was the heart of the beast, the complex rocket engine. A marvel of engineering, its hundreds of intricate pipes, valves, and combustion chambers were assembled by starving hands, forced to build the very weapon terrorizing their allies. But even in this hopeless place, there was resistance. Brave prisoners, knowing they would be executed if caught, would commit subtle acts of sabotage. A deliberately weak weld, a forgotten component, a cross-threaded screw. Despite the sabotage and the sheer brutality, the production line churned out its deadly product. In the largest cavern, known as the assembly hall, row after row of completed V2 rockets stood vertical, like silent, obedient giants waiting for their command. But the human cost of this miracle was staggering. Thousands perished in the darkness, their bodies replaced as easily as a broken tool. The mountain itself became a mass grave, a silent, horrific monument to the factory's insatiable hunger for lives. Finally, the completed rockets, each one a 30,000-pound missile of pure terror, were loaded onto specialized railway cars. They began their secret journey, moving out of the mountain's darkness towards the unsuspecting front lines. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence was scrambling. The reports of a soundless bomb were terrifying, but its source remained a mystery. Analysts pored over reconnaissance photos, searching for any clue, any hidden factory that could produce such a weapon. Acting on fragmented intelligence, Allied bombers relentlessly pounded railway junctions and suspected transport hubs. Their mission, to sever the arteries feeding this new weapon, to stop the rockets before they could ever be unleashed. But the V-2 was a mobile weapon. The rockets, hidden on their transport trains, would vanish into the dense forests of Holland and Germany. Under the cover of trees, launch crews prepared their deadly payloads, safe from the eyes in the sky. The key to this mobility was a specialized vehicle, the Malerwagen. This massive, complex transporter erector would carry the rocket on hidden forest roads, navigating the mud and terrain to reach its secret launch site. Once at the site, often just a simple clearing in the woods, the launch sequence began. In a feat of engineering, the Malerwagen's hydraulic system would slowly, ominously, lift the 30,000-pound missile from horizontal to vertical, pointing it towards the heavens. The launch teams, often working in total darkness, moved with frantic speed. They had mere hours, sometimes minutes, to set up, fuel the rocket, and escape before Allied fighter bombers, alerted by spotters, could pinpoint their position. The fueling process was incredibly dangerous. Highly volatile liquid oxygen, chilled to hundreds of degrees below zero, would vaporize instantly on contact with the air, creating a dense, ghostly fog that shrouded the entire launch site. With the final connections made, the crew would scramble for cover. The air grew tense thick with the smell of rocket fuel and the hissing of pressurized valves. A single spark could incinerate the entire forest clearing. Then, ignition. A massive controlled explosion ignited at the rocket's base. Fire and superheated steam erupted with unimaginable force, tearing at the ground, scorching the trees, and momentarily turning night into a terrifying, brilliant day. Thrusting against its own immense weight, the 30,000-pound missile claws at the sky. It rises, a man-made volcano, a pillar of fire ascending faster and faster, leaving the forests of its birth behind in a cloud of steam and thunder. In seconds, it breaks the sound barrier, a silent thunderclap no one on the ground can hear. It punches through the clouds, accelerating relentlessly, driven by its powerful turbo pumps, racing towards the very edge of the atmosphere. At 60 miles high, the engine cuts out. The thunderous roar is replaced by an absolute terrifying silence. The rocket is now in space, a metal coffin coasting in a perfect, ballistic arc following the cold, unforgiving laws of physics. Pulled by gravity, the weapon reaches its peak and begins the long fall back to Earth. It accelerates to over 3,000 miles per hour, faster than any sound. It becomes a man-made meteor, glowing red-hot as it tears through the atmosphere, aimed at a single unsuspecting city. 5 minutes. That was the entire flight time from launch to impact. 5 minutes for the missile to cross the channel, traveling in a silent arc of death. Below the target, London goes about its day, utterly unaware of the terror plunging from the heavens. And then, impact. There is no warning, no whistle, no scream. The V-2, traveling faster than sound, strikes the ground before its sound arrives. A single city block, a street, a building is simply annihilated in the blink of an eye. Immediately following the flash comes the shockwave. An invisible, brutal wall of compressed air that flattens everything in its path, shattering windows for miles and turning the surrounding streets into a storm of flying glass and rubble. And finally, after the explosion, after the shockwave, the sound of the rocket's approach arrives. A terrifying, delayed thunder from the sky, the sound of a weapon that has already killed you. This was the silent, psychological terror of the V-2. The Allies launched Operation Crossbow, a desperate campaign to hunt and destroy the mobile V-2 launchers. Fighter bombers patrolled the skies over Holland, striking at any and all suspected launch sites. But the launchers were elusive, shooting and scooting in minutes. For every launch site hit, 10 more would fire. The attacks on London and Antwerp continued relentlessly, day and night, turning the winter of 1944 into a new reign of terror. For the first time in the war, air defenses were useless. No Spitfire could fly high enough, no anti-aircraft gun could shoot fast enough. The V-2 was an uninterceptable weapon, a terrifying glimpse into the future of warfare. But it was a weapon of terror, not a weapon of war. The V-2 was wildly inaccurate. It could not target factories, ports, or military bases. It could only hit a city. It was pure, indiscriminate vengeance designed to break civilian morale. But morale did not break. The miracle weapon was a strategic failure. For every one that hit London, many more were lost to sabotage or simply failed, crashing harmlessly into the cold North Sea or remote fields. It was a weapon system bleeding the Reich dry. By early 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. Allied armies were pouring in from the west, and the Soviets were advancing from the east. The V-2 launch sites were overrun, and the Mittelwerk factory itself was now in the crosshairs. In the final, chaotic days, the SS tried to destroy the evidence. The slaves were forced on death marches. The tunnels were set ablaze and vital blueprints were burned. A desperate attempt to hide their crimes and their secrets from the approaching conquerors. On April 11, 1945, American troops reached Mittelwerk. What they found was not just a factory, but a vision of hell. They were shocked by the few emaciated survivors and stunned by the sheer scale of the technology hidden beneath the mountain. The Americans were astounded. Deep in the main assembly hall, they found dozens of completed V-2 rockets standing silent in the gloom. It was the most advanced weapon system on Earth, captured intact. But the real prize was not the hardware. It was the software, the blueprints, the research data, and most importantly, the engineers who had designed it all. A new secret war began, the race to capture this knowledge. The Soviets, advancing from the east, were also hunting for Hitler's rocket secrets. They captured their own share of technicians and hardware from other sites. The battlefields of WWII cooled, but a new Cold War was igniting. Fueled by this captured technology, under the codename Operation Paperclip, the United States secretly evacuated over 600 German scientists and engineers, including Werner von Braun. Their dark pasts were wiped clean, a price paid to win the future. The captured V-2s were shipped to the deserts of New Mexico, under the name White Sands Proving Ground. Here, von Braun and his team, now working for the United States, began to reassemble and test the very weapons they had built in the Mittelwerk tunnels. These captured rockets, now repurposed for science, became the first tools to truly probe the edge of space. They carried instruments, cameras, even biological life, paving the way for a future their creators had only dreamed of. But the Americans were not alone. The Soviets, with their own captured German scientists, were working just as fast. From the V-2, they created the R-1, a direct copy, and then began improving it, sparking an arms race that would define the next half-century. The V-2 was obsolete almost as soon as it was captured. It was the blueprint, the atom from which all future rockets would be born. Its terrifying DNA would soon be found in missiles that could cross continents and eventually reach the moon. The heart of the V-2 was its revolutionary turbopump-fed engine. This single piece of technology, duplicated and scaled up by both sides, became the powerhouse for the first generation of ballistic missiles and the rockets that would eventually conquer space. The rockets of the Cold War, the Redstones, the Atlases, the R-7s, and ultimately the mighty Saturn V, were all direct descendants. They were V-2s in spirit, just scaled to gargantuan proportions. Built to carry not 1 ton of explosives, but men to the stars. The space race. A symbolic battle for dominance was built on the ashes of Mittelwerk. From the silent terror of London to the launch of Sputnik, and from the first man in orbit to the one giant leap on the moon, the V-2's shadow loomed over it all. The architect of Hitler's rocket, once a key figure in that dark regime, became a hero in America, the mind behind the Apollo program. This ambition, once fueled by a dictator, was now fueled by a new democratic dream. It was a complex, morally gray legacy, but the cost of this ambition is a scar on history. The space race was built on the bodies of over 20,000 slaves who died in the Mittelwerk tunnels. They are the forgotten fuel of the rocket age, their suffering a silent testament to the horrific price of progress. Today, the tunnels of Mittelwerk are silent once more. But it is not the silence of secrecy. It is the heavy silence of a memorial, a place of remembrance, warning future generations that the highest technological ambitions can be linked to the deepest human depravity. The V-2's legacy is twofold. It is a story of horrific brutality, but it is also the story of a technological dawn. Every time we check the weather, use GPS, or watch a satellite broadcast, we are touching a world that this single, terrifying weapon helped to create. The V-2 itself now rests in museums, a silent relic of a world at war. It stands as the terrifying ancestor, the Generation Zero of the space age, a 30,000-pound reminder of the moral questions we must ask when we reach for the stars. Outside the mountain, a stark memorial now stands. It lists no names, for the victims were countless, pulled from every corner of Europe. It is a simple, solemn reminder that the journey to the stars began in the deepest, darkest pits of human cruelty. London, the V-2's primary target, bears few visible scars. The craters have been filled, the buildings rebuilt. The city stands as a testament to resilience, its modern skyline a defiant symbol of life, a stark contrast to the destructive purpose of the weapon that once reigned upon it. But the V-2's most terrifying legacy was not in space. It was the intercontinental ballistic missile, the ICBM. The vengeance weapons technology, perfected and scaled, created a new generation of silent killers, capable of ending civilization in minutes. When humanity finally stood on the moon, a triumph of engineering and ambition, they cast a long shadow, a shadow that stretched from the Sea of Tranquility all the way back to the darkness of Mittelwerk, a silent reminder of the rocket's brutal birth. The V-2 was the first object to cross the Kármán line, the first man-made thing to touch space. It was a technological leap born from a genocidal regime, a paradox that still haunts us. Can pure science ever truly be separated from the politics that fund it? The rocket's fire, which lit up the skies over London in terror, also illuminated a new path. It forced humanity to look upwards, not just in fear, but in wonder. It was the terrible, violent birth of the space age. Today, the descendants of the V2 are launched almost daily. They carry communication satellites, scientific instruments, and explorers. The technology, once aimed at a single city, now connects the entire globe, a testament to its neutral, adaptable power. From the terror of 1944 to the interconnected world of today, the V2's journey is a story of contrasts, of light and darkness, of genius and cruelty, of humanity's worst instincts and its most profound aspirations. The fire that rained destruction on London was the same fire that would one day lift humanity to the moon. A terrible dual legacy, showing that technology itself is neutral. It is the hand that wields it which gives it purpose. But we must never forget the foundation. The ghosts of Mittelwerk haunt the launch pads of our greatest achievements. The price for the stars was paid by those who never even saw the sun. Their suffering, the silent bedrock of the space age. The silent killer now rests, a centerpiece of history. It no longer inspires terror, but reflection. It is a machine that changed the world for better, and for worse, a permanent symbol of our darkest innovations. It forced us to look at the sky in a new way. First as a new dimension of warfare, and then as a new frontier for exploration. The choice of what we do next, as always, remains ours. The V2, the silent terror, the fire from space, the weapon that wounded a city and gave birth to the future.
Don't miss our incredible war stories. Subscribe for more. And for the full mission, watch the full video on our channel, link in the description.